Philip, our new general manager, I wanted to introduce him, Philip St. Pierre. He's running the show. He's the man. Okay, he's not Michael Piazzolla's replacement. He's an improvement. Michael's great, but he's fantastic.
What's the title?
General manager. General manager. Okay. Okay. I know you all know Michael, and you hadn't seen the general manager since Michael left. And here's the guy. You all know Lincoln too, and then there's Chris behind him. The brain trust of South Street Seaport is in good hands with them. And Adam Meister right here is a VP of Development. He is really been instrumental with getting us through the ULIP process. And as you may or may not know, I'm a recently transplanted Angelino. I live in New York now, so I'm not an out-of-town developer. Okay.
Do you live in? So for the people who just arrived, you just want to quickly give a snapshot of what your plans are to activate the Seaport area again, talking about what you plan to do with the Brooklyn.
Well, I think one of the great things we can do is bring people down and experience the Seaport as they've never experienced it before, or for it's been many, many years since we had the kind of activities we're promoting with Brooklyn Flea. I'll let them talk about their operation, but they're really going to open up a food service on Front Street, and also they're going to be proposing a bar operation on Front Street and on Fulton Street, which is part of our activation for the South Street Seaport for the summer. We're going to bring in some temporary structures on Fulton and Front Street that will house these businesses, and we're very excited about it. And hopefully I'll be able to show you. We're working through all the issues with EDC, LPC, the city, and so I see.
Some notes here about the status of the South Street Seaport Museum. So where we are currently is post-Hurricane Sandy. The museum was able to reopen the galleries on 12 Fulton Street, which is wonderful because the galleries were upstairs on the 3rd floor. But because of the flooding in the basement, all of the electrical systems, the HVAC systems, etc., were completely submerged by the storm. And so the museum would be very interested in relocating that equipment upstairs and out of the path of a future flood. But that could probably be a couple of years project. In the meantime, we're unable to properly climatize the galleries on Fulton Street. So we were fine during the winter months because we had temporary heat coming in, and the galleries being upstairs and the hot air rising, everything worked in our favor. With the summer weather coming, we can't pump cold air upstairs. So we closed the galleries on 12 Fulton Street, and we're looking at refocusing our attention around the corner onto Water Street. We've done some cleanup work in bound printers and have recently reopened bound printers at 207 and 209 Water Street, along with the Maritime Crafts Center. And probably in about a week or so, we should be reopening Bound & Company Stationers at 211 Water Street. 213, 215 Water Street, where the museum had its Titanic exhibition a year ago, would be the next space that we'd be interested in making repairs to so we can install an exhibition there. Unfortunately, that facility, the floor was completely destroyed by the storm surge and needs to be replaced, and there's a lot of electrical work that has to be replaced in there as well. So, so we've got some work ahead of us. And so the museum just recently signed an extension. As most people know, the City Museum had entered into a 12-month agreement to take over managing the South Street Seaport Museum. And that agreement ended on October 5th. We had the option to extend the agreement for an additional 6 months, which we did. And that agreement ended April 5th. And so we just entered into another 3-month extension, which will take us to July 5th. So it's during this time that we're trying to figure out what the next steps will be for the museum. But in our negotiations and conversations with different parties, it takes us to the point where from one of the main issues that we have is, with all due respect, in dealing with the lease and our relationship with the Howard Hughes Corporation. So from our perspective, the Howard Hughes Corporation's actions to date signify that the museum will not likely survive, and that the Howard Hughes Corporation doesn't seem to have an interest in our survival. We have indications so far are, one, a letter to Margaret Chin, allowing the Ambrose to remain at Pier 16. It's qualified in such a way that it means nothing more than the verbal assurance that we currently have, And we have a letter here to Margaret Chin that I can submit. Basically, it just allows for the museum to keep the Ambrose at Pier 16 as long as it does not interfere with the operations of Pier 17, or if another vessel comes in there, as long as it doesn't take up any space larger than the footprint that the Ambrose currently occupies. So, and I don't know. Margaret Chin was able to gain a commitment from Howard Hughes Corporation that HHC would grant us $750,000 over a 6-month period, but on the proviso that the Seaport Museum signs a 12-month extension of our agreement. The Seaport Museum is running out of cash right now. This amount is insufficient to our waterfront requirements. Moreover, the City Museum, as I mentioned, just signed the extension for just 3 months, which would take us to July 5th. The tall ships at Pier 16 we all, I think, agree that they give authenticity to Pier 17 and to the project that's going on in Pier 17. And they help draw visitors to the district. Thus, we asked in August of 2012 that Howard Hughes support the ships on a restricted basis, meaning that any money that we receive from them would be dedicated specifically to the ships, in the amount of $125,000 to $150,000 each year for the next 5 years. The ships benefit Howard Hughes Corporation. The letter was addressed to David Weinreb, the CEO of HHC, and his response was to say that he would commit to $150,000 annually for 10 years if we would give up our leasehold interests along Water Street. So, we obviously were not asking for a trade that would benefit the Howard Hughes Corporation at the expense of the Seaport Museum. In a recent meeting with Margaret Chin, Chris Curry was kind enough to say that he would reverse David Weinreb's decision for payments to keep up the ships. But to date, nothing has happened with regard to that request. And then I have here the letter that was sent to David Weinreb. Howard Hughes Corporation has declined almost every request made by us, either directly or via the EDC, concerning our 1981 lease, in which Howard Hughes also has rights of disapproval. This includes the ability to rent spaces within our control, including Pier 16, where we are currently limited to a 300 square foot space for retail use. They refused to grant the Seaport Museum any ground floor space, including the vacant corner buildings at Front and John Streets, and also including the ground floor space now occupied by Heartland Brewery. They have offered additional upper floor spaces, but that would keep the Seaport Museum as invisible as it currently is. I can also note that whenever we do sublease any of our spaces, we're currently acting illegally according to the lease, because the lease limits how we're able to utilize that space. But it's important to the museum to survive, to be able to make use of its spaces as much as possible so that we can monetize the capital. By disallowing any earned income from the Seaport Museum, they have refused to allow the Seaport Museum, as I said, to utilize the spaces under our control for our own benefit. Howard Hughes has no reason to help secure the museum's existence because they would get the square footage as a matter of right under the 1981 lease after 6 months of vacancy. So if the museum doesn't utilize its spaces for 6 months, then by default it gets turned over to the Howard Hughes Corporation. They have that option under the lease. They would acquire all of the spaces within the Seaport Museum at 12 Fulton Street and also the spaces along Water Street. So the total amount of square footage that we're talking about is over 80,000 square feet of space. And the Howard Hughes Corporation has twice asked my permission to walk through the spaces with one of their architects. So the City Museum has 3 months to go on the extension. The Seaport Museum and the City Museum are doing everything in our power to make this work. But in fact, we have close to no winning cards in our hand. FEMA, we've been working with a state representative, who's been our representative to FEMA, and we've submitted all of our paperwork for all of the cleanup work that we've done since the storm. And that was the first step. And so we're waiting to get some data back from her, and then eventually that gets submitted for repayment.
What's the time frame?
So you have to lay the money out first to get reimbursed?
Yes, FEMA is a reimbursable grant,
That's
yes.
kind of dumb.
So I think that, as it's been explained to me, they've had situations in the past where they've laid out money to people and then people have not paid to have the actual work done. So everything now is a reimbursable.
Okay, what about insurance?
Clearly, this is you know, it was reported in several of the papers that Susan, you know, was grateful, you know, and appreciated the attempts at 750,000. I understand that more accurately from her, she did tell Councilmember Chin that she was dissatisfied with the amount. She thanked her, which is polite.
Oh,
Well,
yes.
work.
She's very polite.
She's very polite.
Yes.
All right. Now, clearly, when the Museum of New York came in, and the Seaport Museum was dead in its tracks. We all know that. We sat here, you know, and was just amazed at how defunct and the condition of the ships and the lack of and to Susan's credit and to your credit and the Museum of New York, there was a tremendous turnaround. We saw a revitalization, and we were all very heartened by the exhibits and by the activity and by the life that was breathed back into our South Street Seaport Museum. Sandy, of course, drowned a lot of those hopes. We find ourselves now with the possibility, and I'm certainly would be interested in Howard Hughes, becoming the hero and the savior in this situation, particularly since Howard Hughes, and we welcome their business, but enjoys a wonderful deal for public land in the seaport. And as you point out, the existence of the museum helps their business and certainly would bolster the summer months that I know Chris was talking about in terms of activities. But the museum requires something like $3,750,000.
$3,950,000.
900 in operating, right?
Yes.
In its normal
For how
operating.
long?
That's our annual budget.
That's their annual budget.
3,590 is your annual.
900.
$3,950,000.
Almost $4 million, all right? And so the question at this point is, how do we help you find the money for that operating, and also, of course, for capital grants to repair the buildings that Sandy has destroyed? And I think that's the dilemma that we're faced with at this point. And I know that EDC is not a grant agency in the city, but there is money in the city to be had, through the coffers of the city. And does the museum have any direction for this committee in terms of where we might look for assistance? Because we've already been on record that it's so important. It's so important for us to keep this alive.
Right.
Now,
Well,
what
we're
can
actually
we do
hoping
here for you at Community Board 1?
We're hoping for your direction of where we might be able to go to for assistance. I mean, we've been in talks with EDC and DCA and Howard Hughes, and so we're kind of at a loss at this point.
Yeah, let me ask you, the Museum of the City of New York is a very...
Provide your insight. So everything he said is correct?
No, I would say that Jerry's given you part of the story. I think it's important to know that this is primarily a negotiation between EDC and the Seaport Museum, and that we were brought into this obviously because we're a neighbor, and they were asking for certain things that would impact our existing leasehold interest, and we were clear in that we wouldn't give up our leasehold interest, but we would work with them so they could keep their ships where they are now on the north side of Pier 16. So I don't know why that's not something that they think is anything other than what they would be. I don't know what else they would expect. We have a water taxi right now that works on the south side of 17, and we want to make sure that the south side of 17, Pier 17 that is, remains a viable area for us to use long term. And so when we made the commitment to keep the Ambrose where it is, we just said as long as it's not more than what the Ambrose already takes up, there's no issue. So I don't know why that's, that's anything less than satisfactory for the museum. As it relates to the trades that Jerry was talking about, it was a three-party trade. There are things that we would have to give EDC. There are things that EDC is giving the Seaport Museum. So you're only getting part of the story. EDC, I believe, forgave something like a $7 million loan to the museum for the John Street lot. And one of the things the museum would get out of this would be the John Street lot. So they basically have their loan had been forgiven, and then they end up with the John Street lot again, which right now is not theirs, it's EDC's, and we actually have a right of first offer on the John Street lot. We were going to give that up as part of this whole thing that Jerry was talking about, and I'm not going to get into the details of everything because I'm not privy to everything that the Seaport Museum and EDC were talking about, but the portions that we were interested in is the retail space that the museum wanted to continue to operate as retail space. What we told them was, you can't make as much money on this as we can, so it would be better for us to lease the space and somehow put money in your pocket, okay? EDC is saying, hey, wait a second here, we're forgiving a loan, we need to get a return back on our loan, you need to pay us some rent. I have no idea what the communication was between the two of them, okay, but we did not want to give up our retail space on the ground level. We didn't feel it was, one, necessary, and two, even if it was necessary for them.
You're talking about the Heartland.
I'm talking about the corner that you mentioned, what was over near the John Street.
Building to be built.
Pardon me?
A building to be built.
That's the
No,
John Street
no,
lot.
no. These are existing spaces we already have. Okay, they wanted our ground floor retail space. Heartland Brewery is an existing operation that actually went down when Sandy hit, but we expect Heartland to come back. We offered them a space next to Heartland that they could take, that would give them connectivity to Pier 16. We've given them many opportunities to work with us to figure out how to become much more visible within our program, ongoing. Our summer program is actually going to give them many opportunities to become much more visible. One of the things we want to do is actually work on the lighthouse, which is abysmal. It should be upgraded and energized with light, etc. And these are things that we haven't even talked to the museum about for two reasons. One, we're waiting for them to figure out how they're going to make their peace with EDC, and then ultimately we would talk to them about what they're going to be doing long term. But the issues with the South Street Seaport Museum are much too large for Howard Hughes Corporation to solve. Okay, and but we're ready, willing, and able to help any way we can. We think the commitment we've made through Councilmember Chin is a big commitment for a one-year extension. So I think that that we've done a lot, and I think that we could potentially do more in the future, but we need to have a conversation with Seaport Museum. The most conversations we have with the museum, quite frankly, are here in this room. All right, you know my phone number. Susan knows my phone number. Have her call me. You know? And no, what I'm saying is, all the museum has to do is call us, talk to us.
Story, because we're hearing from you, we're hearing from them, and we're hearing from EDC, and nothing's making sense. Nothing's coming together.
It's not getting done.
It's not getting done, and we can't afford to lose the museum. We made that very clear from day one. The confusion I still have is what your property actually is compared to what belongs to EDC and what belongs to Howard Hughes. We're still asking for the meets and bounds. We've asked EDC at our last meeting to give us that. They never did. I mean, so they're a major part of this problem. There's a whole bunch of parts of the
I have a quick
problem.
question. Is there someone from EDC in this room? Just want to make sure no one from EDC is here. Okay.
Especially the area under the city.
That would be a good opportunity to. What this committee really cares about is that the South Street Seaport Museum and its boats stay. And if you are on the Brooklyn Bridge side in that park, what draws your attention to Lower Manhattan are those historic ships that are docked, and you want to be part of it. You want to come down to the South Street Seaport because of the historic ships. So it is the heart and soul of the seaport, is that museum and your historic ships. So what I'm hearing tonight is that we need to do a resolution that we actually need to get everybody in the same room. Howard Hughes, South Street Seaport Museum, EDC, Community Board 1, all pertinent elected officials, do a walkabout. So we can go through those spaces, so we can't have people pointing fingers at each other about not understanding what's going back.
Everybody's pointing and
And
nobody's.
so we have a meeting scheduled probably for May 8th or May 9th. This meeting will happen before then, and then we can feedback that information to this committee then.
Good.
Does that sound like that's something that would work out for the Seaport
Sure.
Museum? Would it work out for the Howard Hughes Corporation?
Sure.
Okay.